Afternoon, everyone, and on behalf of the L. Douglas Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs at VCU, welcome to the April presentation of the Wilder School Lunch and Learn series. Former members of Congress still at work with Congressman L.F. Payne and Todd Haymore. For those of you joining us for the first time, the Wilder School hosts monthly free events like virtual events like this one that feature change agents, thought leaders, and policymakers who provide insights and commentary on relevant topics of the day. None more relevant than today's topic. My name is Stephen Dozier. I'm the Wilder School Senior Director of Development. And before we get started, I'd like to share a few quick announcements. First and foremost, the Wilder School remains at the forefront of our field and continues to rise in the rankings. The latest U.S. News and World Report ranks our school's public affairs graduate program number 39 in the nation. And we hold top 40 rankings in 2 of our specialty areas, as you see here. The Spring 2024 Wilder School in Action magazine is out now. With a great feature on celebrating Governor Wilder's 70 years in public service. So check that out today. Our fall 2024 graduate application deadline for Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness is May 24th. Please visit our application site or share this link with friends, colleagues, or family that might be interested. And last, but certainly not least, Wilder School Spring 2024 commencement will be at 5:30 p.m. on Saturday, May 11th, in Exhibit Hall A at the Greater Richmond Convention Center. Save the date or contact us for more information. Please check the chat for links to all of the updates that I've shared. And now, without further ado, I present our esteemed Dean, Dr. Susan Gooden, who will introduce our moderator for today's discussion.
Thank you so much, Stephen, and welcome everyone. I'm very excited about the topic today. And former members of Congress still at work. I think we're going to all learn so much. And as I was sharing in the practice session before then, I think the big message from this is that neither Congressman Payne or Rector Haymore will see me at any other receptions, because I cornered them at a reception, caught up with Congressman Payne, and learned he was doing this fascinating work, and immediately asked him to be our speaker today. So I really appreciate this. I'm delighted that this session is being moderated by Todd Haymore. Todd wears many hats. He is our rector here at the VCU, rector of our Board of Visitors. He is also managing director of Global Economic Development for Commerce and Government Relations at Hunton Andrews Kurth. And of course, he has served in many gubernatorial roles as well, working with former Governor Terry McAuliffe, as well as Bob McDonnell, in roles in commerce and agriculture and forestry as well. And of course, he, dating back even further, has worked closely with Congressman Payne. And last but certainly not least, I would be remiss if I didn't say that that Todd and I are almost share the same hometown, as we both hail from Southside Virginia, and he grew up in Danville and Pittsylvania County. So there we go for Southside. So anyway, looking forward to today's session. Thank you so much, Rector Haymore, for joining us today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Susan, thank you so much. It is indeed, well, and thanks for the Southside Virginia plug too. All roads lead to Southside. The sun rises and sets there every day. So great to be with you, and thank you for the opportunity. You can run into me at a cocktail reception anytime, particularly if it's an opportunity to do what I get to do today, not only for VCU and the Wilder School, but also to discuss things with my good friend, former boss, mentor, former Congressman L.F. Payne. As I mentioned earlier, you mentioned earlier, the relationship with Congressman Payne dates back to 1988, so a 35-plus year relationship. And again, I called him best former boss ever. first boss as well, and a friend and a mentor. And I would say outside of probably my parents, had the greatest impact on my formative years as a young man growing up in Southside Virginia, and then getting to matriculate to Washington, D.C. to work for him. I'm going to give a brief introduction and then turn things over to former Congressman Payne for some good discussion. I've got a couple of questions I want to get started with, but LF was born and raised in Amherst County. To modest means. His father was state trooper, his mother a school teacher, and it's a story that I love to tell so many times as I got to introduce him when I was working for him, and then beyond that. The good congressman went to Virginia Military Institute and got a degree in civil engineering. That led him to serve in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in South Korea in the late 60s and early 70s, where he literally was a bridge builder and worked on public infrastructure projects in South Korea as part of the Army Corps of Engineers. Came back to Virginia and got an MBA at the University of Virginia. We won't hold against him that he was not able to go to Virginia Commonwealth University and get a degree, undergrad or master's degree there, but VMI and UVA are pretty good schools. That degree, the MBA, led to an incredibly successful business career. He was a developer and recognized in the southeastern United States, but coming back around to Virginia, once again, a tried and true Virginia. His real claim to fame, I'm proud to say, is the development of Wintergreen Resort in Nelson County. And as one person said to me years ago, the man must be onto something. He turned a side of a mountain and a bunch of rock into an incredible resort, a successful resort here all these 40 plus years later. And probably joined by a lot of folks on the webinar today. They learned to ski at Wintergreen, like I did many, many years ago. The success as a businessman led him to be recruited to run for Congress in 1988 in a special election. And that's when I had the good fortune of meeting LF in the summer of 1988 between my freshman and sophomore years of college. And again, so blessed to be able to have the relationship with him over these past 35 years. I want to come back to that special election in my first question to LF to get things going. But over the course of 4 full terms in Washington, working as a U.S. congressman, served on 4 very, very important committees: the Budget Committee, the Veterans Affairs Committee, the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and then one, I know that because we did a ton of work together over the last few years he was in Congress, the very, very important Ways and Means Committee. Ultimately, LF retired from Congress, stepped away from it in 1997. We had a little unsuccessful run for lieutenant governor in 1997, and I had the good fortune of continuing to work with him on that. But after that, it opened up another career opportunity for LF, where he went on to co-found and lead the incredibly successful McGuire Woods Consulting within McGuire Woods Law Firm, a global law firm based here in Richmond. And McGuire Woods Consulting, 20 plus years later, is recognized as one of the best public affairs consultancies in the country, and owes a lot of gratitude to LF for making that happen. Running that for 20 plus years, ultimately retiring, stepping away from that, and then once again getting back into real estate development as the founder and president of Three Ridges Group, a real estate development company based in Charlottesville. And I'd be remiss if I didn't add, since we're talking about the Wilder School here today, LF's dedication and involvement to higher education in Virginia as well. He's now on his second stint on the UVA Board of Visitors, having served under Governor Mark Warner, Governor Tim Kaine, and now flash forwarding again, Governor Northam appointed LF to serve on the BOV a few years back. So I know he's enjoying his time back there again as well. But coming back full circle to the topic of today's Lunch and Learn, is LF is currently the president of the U.S. Association of Former Members of Congress, which is the alumni association for former members of the House of Representatives and the United States Senate, which is what we're going to get into talk a little bit about today. So LF, with that introduction, and apologies if I left out something important, but those were the things that I remember so well from introducing you over the years, and obviously the relationship we enjoy today and the work you're still doing in real estate development in Charlottesville. I'm going to use the point of personal privilege to kind of get things kicked off with your discussion. And I mentioned earlier the special election of 1988, and that's what set you on the path of not only serving in Congress, but now being the president of the Former Members of Congress Association. Tell us a little bit about how the journey began to get to Congress. And I'll also weave in the attention. I know it's important to you. It was such important in 1988 that Time Magazine contacted you about your election. So go ahead with that.
Yeah, Todd, thank you very much. And Susan Gooden, thank you for inviting me to be here. Actually, this is quite a treat and quite an honor. And I'm a big admirer of VCU and all that has occurred and is occurring at VCU. I mean, you're truly Virginia's university in terms of the numbers of students that you admit every year. And I have a grandson who's a first year who loves VCU. I hear a lot about the great things going on at VCU. And I think it's a tribute to Todd as the rector and the board and President Mike Rao and just many positive things are going on at Virginia Commonwealth University. And my good friend Susan Gooden, who I've known for a very long time, I was at her wedding. And I was at her wedding because she married a person who was on my congressional staff, Basil Gooden, who is now doing wonderful things in Washington. He's in assistant secretary of agriculture. And I'm just so proud of Basil and Susan and Todd and all the people I've had a chance to work with. And also wanted to thank Stephen Dozier for his comments. And congratulations on all the achievements of the Wilder School. I've watched that happen over the years. I was with Doug Wilder last week when he spoke at the 25th anniversary of Larry Sabato's Center for Politics. And it was so incredible listening to Doug at age 93 speak as I reflected on all that he's done and said over the years. And he's certainly not lost a step. I mean, he's just a wonderful speaker, wonderful human being, and the Wilder School certainly reflects all of that. So, and let me say thanks to those who've joined this. I know you've got lots going on in your lives, and I appreciate you taking this time and look forward to your thoughts and your questions. Todd asked about my special election. So I had been in business. I'd graduated from the Darden School with an MBA at the University of Virginia and had gone to work with a company out of Boston that had purchased 13,000 acres in the Blue Ridge Mountains near Charlottesville and near where I grew up. And the idea that they had in mind was to create a community which today is known as Wintergreen. And I was the first person on site and became the person in charge of the planning and the development of it. And stayed there then for 15 years, building, developing, and it became quite a success. I was, at the end of my 15 years, I was the president and the CEO of the company that was building and operating Wintergreen. And I'd gotten very involved in issues in Nelson County. Nelson County is, when we began Wintergreen, was one of the 10 poorest counties in Virginia out of 100 counties. And it had lost all of its employment. The folks had closed, and consequently we became not only were we building a community that we wanted to be successful, but we were creating a lot of jobs, and we were paying our community a tremendous amount of tax revenue to Nelson County. And I got very involved in the county, especially in affordable housing and things that really were important there. And because of that, and because of the work that we were doing in affordable housing, and a little nonprofit actually won an award from HUD as the best, most innovative rural housing company or group in the country, in the nation. And it really said to me that I really thought I could do more and give back. And so I was thinking in late 1987, early 1988 about my next move. And I wanted to take time after 15 years to really stop and give back, if you will, but not on a temporary basis, not to simply be on a board, but rather spend some full time working on that. And it just so happened that as that was being explored, or as I was exploring that my congressman, Dan Daniel, who was an iconic 20 plus year member of Congress, passed away unexpectedly. And so there was a special election to be the congressman from the 5th District of Virginia. And I was encouraged by those who knew my thinking to put my hat in the ring to see if I might be able to get nominated and then elected. And long story short, I was nominated first and then elected to Congress. And so I've had a very, and I learned this once I was in Congress, a very unusual path to Congress. Most of the people there first were attorneys and not engineers and builders as I'd been. But also they really paid their dues. They had served on state legislatures or mayors or et cetera, and they'd worked in their respective parties, Democrats and Republicans. And I'd really done none of those things in terms of public service. And so for me, having not really thought about being in Congress at the beginning of 1988, by the middle of 1988, I'm standing on the floor of the House making a speech as the newest member. And it was quite a learning curve for me to get caught up and to be effective representing the 5th District, which was all of South Side and much of Central Virginia. I think those years in Congress were ones that I really treasure. I was elected that time, so for a short term and then 4 more full terms, and served then under 3 presidents and really under 3 speakers during that period of time. I was able to serve on the committees that Todd mentioned, maybe the one that's considered the best committee in Congress to be on, where 8 American presidents have served, was the Ways and Means Committee, and I became a member of that. And among the other, powerful experiences, my seatmate for the years that I was on the Ways and Means Committee, all 4 years, was John Lewis. And John and I became good friends, and I had the experience of hearing from John his entire life story and all that had happened with him. And it was just such a meaningful relationship. And I still think of John very fondly these days and miss him a lot. But those days were ones that were active in the Congress. Things were happening. The end of the Cold War occurred. The Iron Curtain came down. The Berlin Wall came down. I was in Germany shortly after the Berlin Wall came down to welcome the new East German government into the democracies of the world. And we on the Ways and Means Committee were very involved in reaching out to countries around the world, setting up new avenues of trade, and set up then the World Trade Organization, and really saw the world changing in very positive ways, becoming smaller and more interactive at that time. And it was just a good time in the world. The other thing that I got involved in was fiscal responsibility and how do we find a way to get our budget balanced at the federal level. And I was so pleased that due to the work that many of us did, and especially the Clinton administration, when they came in, decided this was something they wanted to undertake, that we actually passed legislation that by the time I left Congress, we were nearing a balanced budget. That happened just after I left. And then looking ahead in the first decade of the 2000s, the projection was that we would have a $7 trillion surplus. And so as I left Congress with the world being in such great shape, with our budget being in such great shape, I just saw that this is going to be, such a great world for my kids and my grandkids to live in. And I guess I have to now look around and say, what on earth happened? Because we're hearing today that we have a Congress that's not functional, dysfunctional, that's unable to get anything done. And I'm just very concerned about the Congress and concerned about the reputation of the Congress. I think it's now held in high regard by less than 10% of the population of America. And, truthfully, that if we can't find a way that Congress works and works well for the people and have the people respect the work that they do, then it's very hard for us to sell democracy in the U.S. because that's the fundamental part that the Constitution calls out for Congress to be Article 1, to get together, to legislate, and to make things work in our democracy. And it's really not, that's not happening now. So let me just stop. Todd asked that question. I was going to go into a little bit of what we're doing as former members, because I think that's interesting. And that's why the dean asked me to come and speak today, was to talk a little bit about what the former members organization is and what it's doing.
Well, LF, if you don't mind, that's a great segue about how you got there and where you think things are today. But before we pivot to that, sort of a Congress now versus then, or then versus now, and the role that you're playing, since we are with the Wilder School Lunch and Learn, talk a little bit about your relationship with former Governor Wilder, meeting him, being a part of the recruitment of you in 1988, you're helping him in 1989. And then, as you and I both know well, him coming to Washington to testify before the House Budget Committee when you were on that committee. So maybe a little bit of history there.
Yeah, no, I'd like to do that. I'm so fond of Doug and so admiring of all that he accomplished. So when I was thinking about running for Congress, one of the people I talked to was the then Lieutenant Governor, Doug Wilder, and he was and gave me a lot of encouragement, in spite of the fact I hadn't, quote unquote, paid my dues, in terms of service or the party. And I always appreciated him and appreciated his good advice. The next year, 1989, Doug then ran for governor. And I was a big supporter of Doug's in our district, the 5th district. And he and I visited a number of communities around the district at that time. And, it's such if you reflect on Virginia's history, Virginia was kind of late to the game in terms of really conforming to the Civil Rights Act. We had, our own massive resistance, and things went on that for much too long. And the integration of our schools didn't happen until the 1970s. And to think then that by 1989, Virginia had become the first state in the nation then to elect an African-American governor. I couldn't have been more proud of not only Doug, but all of Virginia for making that decision. And it's still, I think, a great honor for the state to realize that we were the first in the nation to elect Doug Wilder, and first to have an African-American governor. And so shortly after Doug was elected, I invited him to come to the Budget Committee, which I was a member of, because we were working on some of these issues about how do you balance the budget. And every state in the nation, except one, is required to have a balanced budget. Virginia certainly high among them. And so when Doug came in that day, we had two governors. We had Lowell Weicker, who was the governor of Connecticut, who was there, who was introduced, and it was said of him that this is the governor of Connecticut, and we're so proud to say that Connecticut is the 8th best run state in the nation. So, the committee clapped for Lowell Weicker. And so I then introduced Doug and said, I'm so proud to introduce our governor, Governor Doug Wilder. And Doug Wilder's state, and my state, Virginia, is the #1 state in the nation in terms of being the best run state. And Doug got such a kick out of that. He mentioned that when I saw him last week. But again, I'd say all that just because I so admire him and all that he's accomplished and still is going strong at age 93.
Yeah, and Ella, thanks for that reflection and memory. It was I got to staff you that day. I did a lot of staffing back in those days, but I remember that one very well because of what you just said and what an honor it was for me to be there behind you to support you, but also be there for the recognition that Governor Wilder received and from a macro standpoint, the recognition that the Commonwealth received as one of the best run states in America, something that we continue to enjoy that status. So a lot of fun memories there from 30 plus years ago now. It's incredible. Well, look, this is maybe a good time to pivot to, you talked a little bit about your time in Congress and the good things that you worked on. And I was proud to be there. Basil, my good friend, Susan's lesser half, was there with us, and we did a lot of things together. And as you mentioned earlier, the Congress was certainly at that time seen as an entity, a body that worked in a bipartisan manner, House and Senate working together with the different presidents you served under. So maybe as you start thinking and talking a little bit about what the former members of Congress Association is, talk a little bit about Congress then, and you touched on it, versus Congress now and the role that the former members association is playing in trying to maybe give some guidance to the current members of Congress.
Sure. So the former members of Congress, it's the official name is the United States Association of Former Members of Congress. It was established about 50 years ago, and it was then chartered by the Congress in the early 1980s. It's a 501c3, meaning we don't get any funds from the government. We have to raise out money each year to do the work that we do. And it is essentially the alumni association of people who have served in Congress and have left. And that's about 800 people plus or minus now. And people are doing, a wide variety of things post-Congress. But many of them are very interested in continuing to serve, which is why they were in Congress. And this has become a really good way of people being able to provide a service. And so let me tell you just a little bit about this. We are unashamedly bipartisan. It seems that increasingly today organizations don't do that as much as they used to, but we've found that the only way that we feel we can be effective is to work in a bipartisan way, so that our board is 24 members, there are 12 Democrats and 12 Republicans. Our leadership is half Democratic and half Republican and goes back and forth from Republican to Democrat. I am in my second year as president. Actually, a Virginian, Barbara Comstock, former member, is the president-elect. And Barbara and I have been serving together during this time. She will then be the new president at the end of this year, and so forth. So 2 years of Democrat, 2 years of Republican. Whenever we convene groups to meet or whatever we do, it's always done with equal numbers of Democrats and Republicans. And this group gets along amazingly well. Very little, I don't know of any animosity as I'm thinking about it during the time I've been associated with this group, but it's all about how do we make democracy better? How do we promote the Congress, and how do we reach out to our allies around the world and have them better understand us and do the things that good neighbors ought to be doing. So we have some organized programs. One is called a Congress to Campus program, where we visit bipartisan teams, campuses around the country. The past year, we visited over 50 campuses And we go there and we speak to students. We go to classes. We talk to faculty. We do events like this and with the broader community of people at the particular college or university. And we're getting really a lot of great feedback in terms of, particularly from students who participate in this. And the number one comment we seem to get is, I never knew a Democrat and a Republican could sit side by side in front of the class and have a discussion like the one that we were able to have. And I think part of this then is sort of modeling the way Congress is supposed to work and members of Congress are supposed to behave, which we've seemingly gotten very far away from that. So that's an important program. We intend to do as much of that as we can, and we're trying to grow that with sponsorships that we're seeking, trying to help as we, again, are a 501c3 and need to raise funds to do all these things that we're currently doing. We're working now with the current Congress, and the current Congress had a group called the Select Committee of Modernization, and that was members of Congress, 6 of each party, who had been appointed by the Speaker, and this was Speaker Pelosi who started this. Their job was to find ways of making the Congress function better and work better. And some of it was technology and how do you modernize what goes on. But much of it was really about how do people learn to work better together, get along better together, how do we have more civility, how do we get back to the compromising that used to happen in order to truly make Congress work and get things done. So we've been advising that group. They've actually had hearings and we've been there and testified and talked about things that seemingly had worked that maybe weren't being done anymore. That group has morphed into something which is a subcommittee on the Oversight Committee now under the Republican leadership, and still now there are 4 members of each party, bipartisan co-chairs, and they make recommendations to the Congress. They've made 200 recommendations. More than a third of them have been enacted. But they now still exist, but in a little bit different form. But we're still working with that group within the Congress, trying to help them work better and collaborate and cooperate and build trust and those things that are so necessary in order for Congress to work the way that it really should. So those things are happening. We also once a year have an award, and we will do this next month in May, but it's called the Statesmanship Award. And we have a Republican and a Democrat in the Senate and one's in the House, and we'll honor those folks for the work that they are doing on a bipartisan basis. So that's all going on as well, and that's become a good event, I think, in Washington, and a way to recognize people who work together. They're not given much credit for that, and in fact, in many circles, they are penalized for working with the other side or working with the other party, and that's a problem. In addition to that, we are working, and we have congressional study groups, and we have these with members of Congress, current members of Congress, around the work that's being done with some of our best allies. So we have the Congressional Study Group on Japan, Korea, the EU, Germany, and we're looking at other places to do more of this. And we get the members involved, we get the ambassadors from those countries involved. We travel to those countries and they have their delegations travel. And we're trying to build firm, better more dependable relationships. We recently gave the ambassador from Ukraine an award for the people of Ukraine to show the amount of support that we intend to show to them as they're going through some very challenging and difficult times. So, and there are more things that we do. Some of them are alumni association kinds of things in terms of just getting together and seeing old friends and telling stories. We do have a memorial service each year in the Capitol where we recognize those people who've passed away during that year, and lots of the families come in from around the country for that. And we meet with the Congress officially once a year to report the activities that we are currently involved in and what we're doing, and all of that then gets to be a part of the congressional record. So, you know, I'm proud of the organization. I think it's one that really is working very hard, trying to make our democracy work better, make our Congress work better, and reach out to our allies and generate better relationships.
Yeah, gosh, LF, you and I have talked about the association a number of times over the years, but I must admit I learned a few more things from you listening to that, and I'm sure that our participants did as well. I'll take the liberty before I turn to some of the first questions that have come in of just not only thanking you for the public service that you gave to Virginia and the country as a congressman, but gosh, you know, given everything that we talked about with the incredible divide and government and now and the low approval rating that Congress, I was going to say enjoys, it has right now. Thank you for what you and the former members are doing, because it is so important, and I'm hopeful that, and probably share the sentiments of a number of folks that have joined us here, hopeful that the work that you're doing now and incoming President Comstock and others that come in after you will help get our Congress back to working, get our Congress back to having a higher approval rating, and it be a place that enjoyed the reputation that I know it enjoyed when you were first elected. And it was an honor and privilege for me to work for you. And I know other staff people felt the same way, certainly in those late 80s and 90 years that we served under you and worked with so many other members of Congress and staff across the entire country. So thank you. And I hope that the work that you all continue to do will help improve things and shape the future of the Congress to something that maybe resembles a little bit more of what you and I remember from our time there together. So anyway, thank you. Let me see, I've got questions coming in, so I'm going to turn now to the first question from the audience. Congressman, will former members of Congress support and advocate for increasing the number of seats in the United States House of Representatives? And a little commentary here. The current size was fixed about 100 years ago. The population of the country has tripled since then, leaving us with a legislative body that serves major donors and does not represent the people because of gerrymandered districts, et cetera, et cetera. So a question to you as president of the Former Members of Congress Association, will you support and advocate increasing the number of seats in the U.S. House of Representatives?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good question. And the history of that is that Congress, when it first started in 1789, had 59 members. And the idea was that it would grow as more states became part of the Union and as the population grew. And it grew to 435 by, I think it was in the 1920s. And then that was the time that it was said that that would be the right number of representatives plus 2 senators from each state, or 100 senators. And it's been that way for that long. There's very little interest in or talk in the Congress about it being any larger. And I think maybe for a couple of reasons. One, I mean, the group, even at 435, is a challenging group in order to try to be effective, and it does its work by breaking down into committees, and the committees are largely responsible for doing the work of the Congress and then bringing things to the floor. one, I think it's a matter of just organization and accountability in terms of how that might work. Two, it is easier today for a congressman to communicate with their constituents, even than it was, Todd, when you and I were there, simply because there's, with social media and with cable news and all those kinds of things, there's just a real, there are just more opportunities, I think, to do a better job of staying in touch with more people than you could when we were there and had to do that by mailers and town meetings and all the things that we did very frequently back in that day. So it's certainly worthy of consideration, but I think there's very little discussion about it today, and I don't know that it would necessarily make Congress better if there were more districts and more members. But I mean, the question is correct in that it's been 100 years since the size of the Congress has changed.
Yeah, I think when I went to work for you, there was about right around maybe 500,000 people per district. I'm not sure what that number is now, but I would guess it would be significantly higher than that. Do you know the ratio?
Yeah, it's closer to 800,000 people are in a congressional district. And clearly, I mean, that's a lot of people to stay in touch with,
right.
But it's certainly, I think, something that is doable. And certainly, I think something that people need to do more of. I think we did more when I was in Congress than people are doing today, just in terms of being out in the district and having town meetings. And, as you may remember, we would go to the post office early in the morning and meet all the people who were coming in and our communities. It was a great way to kind of get the flavor of the people, what they were doing, what they were thinking, and answer questions that might be on their mind.
Yeah, even when the only person who showed up for a town hall meeting was the custodian.
Right.
I remember
that well.
I remember that one well too. And your point of that communication is so how much easier it is to communicate. I mean, when I worked for you, LF, it was phone calls and fax machines for the most part, and direct mail. I think it was the last 2 years that 1995, 1996, we got on the internet. And we had email within the district, and the cell phones weren't even in heavy usage so yeah, it's so much easier to connect now, but also there seems to be much more disconnect. And I think you and I would agree. So different times, but the challenges, and that's maybe a couple of questions that have come in as you were talking, and I was following up there. With the current composition of Congress and the current public discourse, how optimistic are you that change can be made to get Congress to function the way it should or the way it used to in the future, and particularly with the work that you and the former members of Congress Association are trying to do?
It's a really great question. And I have a lot of people who think that what we're doing is a futile effort, that we are so bitterly divided that it's impossible to bring people back together. But there are things that can be done both outside the Congress, and we are looking at things that are going on now, like ranked choice voting to decide who the candidates ought to be, or some of the redistricting efforts that are going on around the country that are making sure that the districts aren't so biased, I guess, in terms of whether they are Republican districts or Democratic districts and so forth. But even inside the Congress, and that's where we mostly can uniquely kind of work. I'm reminded that when I was I think the divisions that occur today, much of it started around the time that I was in Congress, and it started when I think Newt Gingrich and the Republicans won the majority after 40 years of Democratic majority, and decided that they were going to have a no compromise policy. And it just made it so difficult to try to find a way to get very much done when people come to the table and say, no matter what we talk about, I'm not going to compromise, because that's what Congress is supposed to do.
Right.
And I remember when, Gingrich was elected, before that, when you were elected to Congress, whether you were a Democrat or a Republican, all of the members would go to the Kennedy School at Harvard, and we'd get conservative and liberal people who would come and speak about the issues that we would likely be confronted with in the next 2 years. And it was a real learning experience there. But the best part of that was that you really had time to get to know the people who were in your class, the people who got elected at the same time. And you got to know about their election, and you got to know their families, and you got to be friends. And then as you went into the Congress, that became sort of your group that you worked with as you reached out and learned more about other people. But it was a bipartisan group, and you had friends on both sides of the aisle as you started. When Speaker Gingrich came in, he said that one of the problems he thought with the Republican caucus was that they were being brainwashed at Harvard at the Kennedy School, and consequently had all the Republicans then go, I think at that time it was George Mason, and Democrats then went to the Kennedy School. And there was never an opportunity really then to meet. And I just think simple things like that, and simple things like getting more opportunities for people really to spend some time to get to know each other, like being on the baseball team, or traveling together, or that sort of thing, are things that really can happen and can make a difference, even with people who have very different ideas about the government and small government versus large government, or how the monies ought to be spent in the government, and all those things that can be very contentious. So yes, I'm optimistic. I think it's all about people and getting the right people who want to do the right thing for the country. And I'm sensing that there's more and more in the country itself, people who want to see Congress get along and get things done. And that's what we're trying to encourage.
Yeah. Now, and Ellen, it's a great point. I growing up in a conservative household myself, but I remember my mother and father talking about, it's important to get along with other people and vote for the person and not the party, because it was all about compromise to get things done, whether it was in Richmond or Washington, D.C. And I remember the time, I mean, some of the deeper relationships that you had and I had as staff were working across the aisle with, like, then Senator John Warner from Virginia, or Republican Richard Burr from the 5th District of North Carolina, and our districts bordered each other, and the constructive dialogue and the work that you all did. And I just, do you, as a former member of Congress and the association, do you hear about that type of dialogue going on with between members, or between members of the House and Senate?
Yeah, I think some of it happens more in the Senate, you hear about, than in the House, because there are fewer senators, and there are senators who've been there a long time who've established some of these relationships. But there seems to be real interest in, on the Senate side, of working together. And because they have the filibuster, and you have to get 60 votes, so generally get things done, you have to get members of both parties involved in order for that to happen. On the House side, there's a group now called the Problem Solvers Caucus, and this is a group that's half Democratic, half Republican, and these groups meet once a week, and they talk about issues where there's a lot of commonality. They don't talk so much about abortion and gun control and those things that are very contentious, but there's so many things that are important to our country that people can agree on and can work on. And that group was, I think, particularly effective in the last Congress when there was a lot of attempts to try to put things together to help post-COVID and to get infrastructure going and so forth. And so, I mean, yes, there are people in the Congress today that you never hear about because they're not that interesting. If you listen to cable news, I mean, you get the people on the left or the right, talking about their agenda and how they don't like each other. But there are quite a few people in the middle, just not enough in order to continue to get things done in a positive way.
Yeah, and I must admit, I enjoyed watching problem solvers are generally on. I know they're frequent guests on Morning Joe in the morning. I see them on CNN, and it's always nice as someone who served with a member of Congress who was about building bridges across the aisle and working together. I find that much more interesting now to listen to them versus the discourse from the far right or the far left. So thank you for making me feel better about some of the little bit of stuff that we do see from the Problem Solvers Caucus, and maybe just touch on that, the Problem Solvers Caucus, which versus the Blue Dog coalition that you helped found back in 1995, and the work that you were trying to do then across the aisle with Republicans to solve problems, and maybe that's a forebearer of the Problem Solvers Caucus.
Yeah, sort of the same idea. The idea was sort of the centrist part of the Congress in trying to find ways to gather people around the center that agreed on various policy matters in order to get things done. The Blue Dogs were all Democrats, so there was a group in the Democrats had lost the majority in the minority, and then the moderate Democrats formed the Blue Dogs, and it was a small group at first. It grew to be over 50 members, 50 members, which was a big force. And I remember the Washington Post editorializing back in the day, followed the Blue Dogs, because we were sort of took the best ideas of the Democrats and the Republicans and worked with the Republicans and the Democrats trying to put all that together. That's essentially what's happening with Problem Solvers Caucus, and maybe it's better because it's not just one party, it's both parties trying to work that out.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I mean, I think that the work that the Blue Dogs did, obviously very proud to have been a part of that with you from the staff level, but I think it set in motion a lot of good discussions. And I don't know how large the Problem Solvers Caucus is, but maybe that's something that former members association can advocate for more membership because that's really what you all were there to do, is solve problems and make this country even better than it already is. And again, it's one of the reasons why so many of us were proud to serve as staffers under you and others. As we come into maybe the last question or second to last, I think this might be a good, interesting question, and something that you and I have talked about a great deal over the years. Most people only identify their congressman about what he or she are doing in Washington and the votes they cast and seeing people on television, but there's such an important role for congressmen and staff back home in the district. Could you talk just a little bit about the focus of the work that you did and current members are doing back with their constituents in the district, not the votes that are taking place on the floor in the House, but the work back home directly on behalf of the citizens of the particular district?
Yeah, and thank you, Todd. You set that up nicely. I think being a member of Congress is really two jobs. One is all the things that you do in Washington as it relates to legislation and so forth, and then what you do back home in your district. And for me, that was the reason I ran, and the most important thing, recognizing what I'd recognized about Nelson County and how we might be helpful in other counties. 5th District had 17 counties and 5 cities. And as you well know, because you did a lot of this work, we reached out to each of them to tell us what it was that they were trying to accomplish. And then we would see, how can we help you meet your goals? And so things that happen during that time where we were able to get Head Start programs, which people wanted in most all of our counties and cities. We opened some medical clinics that in medically underserved areas. In many of our areas, we were able to attract industry. Lots of people were looking for jobs in industry, and we had a good pipeline to companies that were looking to grow and talk to them about becoming part of us and our district. And so those were always sort of important things, and we took great pride whenever we seemingly had a victory that we could point to that made a county or city or community a better place to live as a result of something we were able to do. And also there was a lot of ombudsmanship, if you will. People were having problems with Social Security and Medicare and couldn't get their passport figured out and all that. And we did a lot of that work and helped a lot of our citizens on things that they felt very frustrated with and challenged by.
Yeah, it was always a lot of fun to, even though I was in the Washington office, I drove you around a lot back on weekends in the district. And then we've referenced Basil several times. We had Basil in the Farmville office. We had folks in the Danville office. We had folks in Nellies Ford and Charlottesville. And they were the ones that were doing the work directly with the constituents more than we were. But occasionally we would get those phone calls about a passport or veterans benefits or unemployment. Or, as you know, because we've laughed about it a lot over the years, sometimes people would pick up the phone and tell us how unhappy they were that their cable bill had gone up, and or they're unhappy they were about the U.S. Postal Service and not getting a letter on time, particularly around the holidays. I mean, that was the complaints there. So your ombudsman discussion or point is a great one, because I felt that way as a staff person reporting to you on the things that were out there that we were dealing, or the district was dealing with, and those of us occasionally were dealing with in Washington when, gosh, LF, how many flags were requested to be flown over the Capitol? I mean, can't imagine how many thousands of flags that we had flown over the U.S. Capitol for our constituents. And the people still to this day have them in their homes or flying them, and little things like that. Most people just don't think about with their U.S. congressman.
No, you're exactly right. So I think there are two pieces of that job. When you go to Congress, you have the ability to spend your money in either of those camps you choose. And some people spend almost all of it in Washington, and some people spend almost all of it in their districts. I think we tried to find that balance so we could be effective in both venues, and it seemingly had worked out pretty well for our constituents, I think.
Well, LF, maybe that's a positive note to end on as we're coming up on the 1 o'clock hour. Any final words from you that you want to share with our participants?
Well, I don't know if we have any young people on the phone, but one of the reasons I continue to be involved in this is to really encourage students and young people to really be involved. It is a challenging time. There's a lot of division. And I think I'm optimistic because the young people who I talk to today, I think, are so able and so capable and and so interested in making our country work better. And I just think it's so important that they, not feel negatively about what's going on, but really positive and spend time, jump in there and feel like they can make a difference, because they really can. And I learned that personally, and I know that others can do that as well.
LF, thanks. Again, thank you for your confidence in me 30 some years ago to hire me and pushing me into a career that's been split between public sector service and private sector. Susan, Stephen, thank you as well for having me to moderate and take a few trips down memory lane with LF. It has been an honor and a privilege, and thanks to all our participants as well. And I'll turn it back over to you, Susan and Stephen.
Yeah, thank you so much, Todd, and thank you, Congressman Payne, for an amazing discussion and One that I'm sure all of us who are watching have learned so much from, especially the inner workings of our Congress and those who are still striving to make this country a better place. And with that said, I am going to now turn our attention to our May save the date for the Wilder School Lunch and Learn series, Immigrants in Virginia, Opportunities and Challenges with Dr. Salta Liebert. Dr. Liebert will discuss immigration in Virginia and the barriers immigrants face in their integration journey to life in the Commonwealth. And so we hope everyone here will join us on May 15th at noon. Thank you all for sharing your insights. Thank you to the communications team in the background for working very hard. And thank you to Dean Gooden. We look forward to seeing you guys in May. Until then, enjoy the rest of your lunch hour, and you all have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.